May I have your attention, please?
Welcome to Real Gaijin, unveiling the real Japan, an American expat's inside look. Now it's time for another story from the Read My Lips series of podcasts. Summarized podcast. Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Real Gaijin's Ask Me Anything podcast. And today we have a very special guest, Baye McNeil. It's my pleasure to finally meet you, sort of in person, online at least. And I have had the pleasure of reading your book and doing a book review earlier, your brand new book. But today we get to literally ask you everything. So I'm looking forward to seeing what we get in our questions. But I have a feeling most of our viewers here will have probably already read some of your posts from several years ago on the Japan Times Black Eye column, which is just fantastic. That's how I first learned about you, too. But I didn't realize that you are the author of 3 best-selling books, and I'm looking forward to hearing all about your background, how you got here, and so forth. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me, man.
All right. Well, great. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. This is a live interview, so please feel free to comment, ask questions. We will try to keep up with the questions through the little window on our mobile phone and answer them as they come up. Also, for anyone that doesn't have time to stay for the entire hour or missed part of it, don't worry. This whole thing is being recorded. I promise to get it out to you all at some point over the next 2 days. Give me a couple days, but I will absolutely do that so you can go back and review what we've talked about. Also, just a little bit more background. Purpose of Real Gaijin. Real Gaijin, Gaijin means, or Gaikokujin means foreign. And the two of us have been long-time expat foreigners from America living in Japan. We're not alone. There are now almost 4 million of us here in the country, and that's really changing the dynamics for what it means to be a foreigner. Now, my guest today has been defining what it means to be a foreigner for over 2 decades, so we're curious to know more about that. But I have a feeling that we're on the cusp of a new trend here. So my goal with this program is to introduce to you some dynamic fellow real gaijin like Baye, and one at a time. We've got 4 million more episodes to go, but today let's get into it. Okay. So, all right, we're always asked where from. All right, I gotta ask you, where from?
Well, originally I'm from Brooklyn, New York.
I've heard of it.
Born and raised, and I lived there until I came here.
Oh, well, okay. Well, that's a succinct answer. Okay, so tell us a little bit more about what led you to Japan. How'd you end up here?
How did I end up here? Wow. Well, before I came to Japan, I was working. Well, I don't know exactly what do you.
Well, I think
That's a very broad question.
I know. Well, all right, I was
brought
thinking
me
back to your
Japan?
book.
Okay, you want me to just focus on that aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, for example, you.
Um. Ooh, I wrote this. There's a whole chapter in the new book about this because, like you said, this is one of the most common questions you ask, and I think over the last 20 years since I've been living in Japan, that answer has evolved.
Okay.
Because the more I learned about myself, the more I understood why I actually came here, and where I'm at right now. The evolution continues, but where I'm at right now, I think the reason I came here was for, I don't know, it's similar to the reasons that other artists departed from an environment or an atmosphere that was not conducive to being their creative best. And that's what America was at the time. When I left America, it was around, well, I first started getting the idea of leaving America around after 9/11. I was there in New York when that occurred. And, as it was for most of the country, it was a very traumatic experience watching this thing live from my roof. I could see I could see it. And it really shook me up. But more so than that was what took place in the aftermath of 9/11. It got darker and ugly. I think one of the incidents that really shook me up the most was I grew up in Brooklyn, and in my community, instead of convenience stores like they have here, we have what we call bodegas.
Yeah.
And these bodegas in my community are mostly owned by Dominicans or middle people from the Middle East, mostly Yemen. And there's a bodega near my home that I've been going to since I was a child. That's owned by Yemenis guys that have been part of the community since I was a child. I'm
Sure.
going, hey, Muhammad, make me a tuna sandwich, whatever, right? And after 9/11, I went inside the shop and I'm like, hey, Muhammad, how you doing, man? And I saw this very, this look on his face that really shook me up. I'm like, hey, what's wrong, man? And he's like, people are calling me a terrorist.
Uh, yeah.
And he's been there longer than most of the people in the community. All of us grew up on his heroes. You know what I mean? On his sandwiches. I'm like, really? And he had a gun, visible on his counter because he said people have been coming in there threatening him. And I couldn't believe it because I grew up in a black community, and you don't. I mean, I expect that from certain communities, but not from the black community because we know how it feels to be on the dark end of that kind of ignorance. And it really shocked me. It really, really shocked me that people of African descent were coming into a store of a person of Middle Eastern descent and referring to them in a way that that really shook me to the core. So, and not to say that that's it, but that was the I think that was one of the main things that made me say, okay, I need to get away from this for a spell.
Okay.
And I had a couple of friends who were living abroad, and they spoke to me and said, you should come, check out what's happening in other countries. I'm like, really? Okay. So I went down to Haiti, and I stayed with a friend of mine who was down there doing microfinancing. And I stayed with her for about 3 weeks, and wow, was that a refreshing break? I mean, I have to say that Haiti has its turmoil and its political unrest and instability and whatnot. But aside from all of that, it was the culture shock in the best sense. You know what I mean? It was it was a chance for me to see the world outside of the my sphere of comfort in Brooklyn, and it really did. It did broaden my perspective. It did give me a chance to see that um, I could survive outside of America. Just watching how she lived outside of America. And then I had another friend who just happened to be living in Japan. I mean, if he had been living in Timbuktu, I'd probably be in Timbuktu now. So I went to visit him here in Japan. I had no interest in Japan. I was not into manga or anime or ninjas or whatever. But I came over here and I stayed with him for a couple of weeks. And the feeling I got when I was here, the feeling of a feeling of being refreshed, of living in, of cleaning the slate,
Mm.
completely. That really did it for me. So I said, you know what, I could do this for a year. And I'm sure many
That was
people
20
came
years
here
ago.
with that intention. I said I could do this for a year, and so I got a job with one of those Eikaiwa, franchise English schools that were popular at the time. This one was one of the most popular. I'm sure you're familiar with Nova. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
got a job with Nova, and I came over here and was teaching English with Nova for a year. And I met someone. This
Ah,
must be a really familiar story for a lot of real Gaijin over here. I met someone, and we got, we hit it off. And that year became 2 years, became 3 years, and so on and so forth. But it wasn't my current wife, the person I hit it off with, and she actually she took ill and got very very sick, and she passed away. And actually, she was the inspiration for the first book I wrote. I dedicated that to her, Aiko, and yeah. So yeah, that's how I got here. Long story, short story long. That's how I
yeah,
got
no,
here.
that's a great story, and it is kind of familiar. Now, you were starting out in Yokohama?
I started out in Saitama. Actually, I was out in the
Oh,
sticks. Well, I wouldn't call it the sticks. I was in Musashi Ulawa,
Okay.
and that's on the infamous Saikyo line, which
Yeah.
is, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this is the infamous Chikan line,
Oh.
and yeah, yeah. So that was my introduction to mass transportation in Japan. Watching these guys ply their trade,
Oh
and if
no.
you don't, and for all the listeners who don't know what Chikan is, these are the subway gropers, and it's a big groping problem here in Japan. I'm not sure if any of your listeners are familiar with it, but the Saikyo line is one of the lines most infamous because it's one of the more crowded lines. They can get away with this stuff, and they're pretty flagrant. On the Saikyo line, it's really a notorious line. So I'm watching them, attacking these schoolgirls, and I started, protecting them. Playing
Mm.
Gaijin superhero, kind of elbowing these guys away because most of the passengers ignore it like it's not happening.
Yeah.
They don't really, interfere. But I was like, nah, this is not right.
Mm.
There's something wrong with this, and so that was one of my first experiences of interfering with how things go here. I would say.
Well, I'm sure you did a lot of good
Um,
with that. And so, did you start blogging right around this time?
exactly. Yeah, I started blogging in 2008, and my first posts were about these kinds of things. The kinds of things I was seeing on the train. I was blogging about cock blocking chican. That was one of my earlier posts, and some of the other experiences I've had on the trains because I grew up on the subway in New York, and I
Ah,
love trains. I remember as a child, the first thing I wanted to become when I grew up was a motorman or an engineer on the train.
mm, mm.
And so I was big on trains. I'm still big on trains, but the experience that stood out the most here in Japan, we probably going to talk about that later, but the empty seat phenomenon.
Yeah, right.
That was one of the things that really first inspired me to start really writing about the experience because that was having a more. I think that was impacting me more than even the Chicans were, and yeah,
Okay.
because this was a more frequent occurrence than that,
Well, true.
and this would be, and I started realizing that this this was not something that people were talking about. I didn't see anyone, not that I was a, internet head, and this is back in the Yahoo Japan days.
Yeah.
I think Facebook was just getting started then and stuff like that. So, there was social media wasn't a big thing then. I mean, it was growing, but it wasn't as huge as it is now. But so what I was seeing online, most of the people there were a lot of bloggers about Japan at that time, but none of them really focused on this. They were talking about temples and sushi and weird misspelled English signs and that kind of stuff. Just
Yeah,
how
yeah, yeah.
quirky Japan. Because
Right.
that's the kind of things that readers were interested in, seeing how quirky Japan is. But nobody was talking about the dark side too
Yeah.
often.
So maybe you could tell. I mean, I know what you mean. I've known it from the book, but I know from personal experience too. Maybe not to the extent that you do, but tell us a little bit more about what you mean by the empty seat on the train.
Well, if you're a conspicuous non-Japanese person living in Japan, you probably experienced this thing, and to varying, you know, some people experience it more often than others, but if you've probably experienced it. What it is that the seat next to you will remain empty, regardless of how crowded the train might become, and some people can ignore it. I mean, I think I've heard so many different responses to the empty seat that it made me feel like, am I overreacting? Is there something wrong with me that I'm taking this, to heart the way I have? So I started questioning my response to it. Was it about me or was it about the seat? Because my response, similar to the reason I came to Japan, has also evolved over the years. My
Mm.
response to the empty seat. When I first came here, I didn't pay any mind. He was like, "Hey, more space for me." Oh, I got some leg room here. I can what you man spread or whatever. I can do my thing, right? And then the next response was, why is the seat behind, why is the seat beside me? Why do people find it so abhorrent to sit there? And I started thinking, do I smell? What's going on? Is it I don't wear cologne? Is it my speed stick? That musk aroma. What's going on? And then it evolved into maybe I'm giving off a vibe that's making people that's repelling people, because
Mm.
because of how I'm feeling about this seat, maybe I'm giving off a vibe that's repelling people, unconsciously. I was going deeper and deeper into it.
Yeah.
And that's when yeah. And that's when I started writing about it, because as a writer, I don't stay on the surface. I start to dig and dig and dig,
Yeah.
and the more I think the way I dig into things, people found appealing. And my first
Mm.
post on my blog was a post about the empty seat. It was about 5,000 words. I went fully in,
Whoa.
and yeah, yeah, yeah. I wasn't one of those. I don't. I didn't. My target wasn't the short attention span people. I was. I don't have. I have no. I don't write for the short attention span. Sorry. And I went in fully on this thing, and at the evolution I had gone through to that point. This was 2008, October 2008, and yeah, I wrote this post, and it went viral. My first post,
Yeah.
because nobody was talking about it, and the way
Yeah.
I was talking about it, no one had talked about it that way before, and that was what launched my blog, and from then on, it was up and up.
What kind of response did you get from foreigners like us here in Japan and Japanese people about that?
It varied, like I said, some people, it depends on Japan as a whole, depends on the mindset you come here with,
Mm.
and the people or experiences you have once you arrive here. And some people came here and their experience was Japan is the most loving, harmonious, wonderful, you know, people in
Yeah.
the world, and they can't even imagine
Mm.
some of the stuff I was talking about coming from Japanese. So their response was, "You need to shut up and stop complaining." It's your imagination.
Mm.
It was a lot of what do
Yeah.
you call it? Gaslighting, and
Yeah.
it was hot. It was hot, but that's what made it go viral, because
Mm.
people were talking about it on both sides of the spectrum. You had those people, and you had the people like, yeah, man, this is,
Mm.
that's the worst experience I'm having here, because in Japan you're not going to face the kind of racism and ugliness you do in other countries.
Mm. Mm.
It's very subtle here, and very
Mm.
you know non-violent and peaceful. It's
Yep.
kawaii racism. You're not gonna get the ugliness you get there, and people figure, well, if it's not ugly, why complain about it? Just suck
Uh,
it up and keep it going. Why complain about why complain about racism that doesn't result in violence?
mm.
Physical violence. Why complain about it when you just came from a country where it does result in physical violence and deaths and shit? Why complain about racism that manifests itself as microaggressions and
Mm.
stuff that's not gonna bring you any injury? Why complain about it? So I felt, so this is what I'm getting on my blog. We have these type of conversations in the in the area where you God, I'm sorry, I just woke up. But
Yeah.
in the area where you have in the what's the area where you leave the remarks? In the remarks area,
In the
that's the
comments.
kind
Yeah.
of conversations that we're
Yeah.
having. This
Okay.
kind of heaviness. So it was an intellectual exercise that really put me in the mind frame of, oh, this is much better than teaching. I should be writing here.
Mm.
What am I doing? English teacher, it's okay, if that's your thing,
Mm.
but that's not my thing. I was a writer when I came here. I was writing back in New York. I was writing for a newspaper, and in Brooklyn. I had written a novel before I came to Japan, so I was, I was already right. I wasn't established in anything. I mean, I was making some noise in Brooklyn with my column because I was focused on the gentrification that was underway there,
Ah,
and the way I
cool.
went at some of the issues here in Japan is the same way I went at gentrification in Brooklyn. So I was making noise back then, but after 9/11, that
Ah,
took the that took the that kind of sapped some of my spunk.
okay.
So yeah,
Uh,
I thank God for Japan because it recharged me.
well, definitely. And say, just before we head away from Brooklyn and back to Japan, I was really struck by what you wrote in your latest book about your upbringing and the influence of your mom. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, my mom was and this is back in the 70s. She was part of the Pan African Black Power movement of the 70s. So this is post civil rights movement. This is you know, Black Panthers and uh, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Pan African movement, but the Pan African movement was established to build stronger bonds between the African continent and the African
Mm,
diaspora, which
mm,
Black Americans are part of. And if you're part of the diaspora, especially I don't want to speak about other countries. I don't know all the specifics of growing up in these other countries. But when you grow up in America, you're overly influenced by Europeanization, and you're taught that the heroic figures in the world are white. And the greatest musicians, the greatest
mm,
artists, the greatest everything are white. So it has an impact on your soul, on your spirit, on your self image, your identity when you see everything that is good in the world is white and everything that is mediocre is non-white. And my school was like, no, this is not true. This is a lie. This is a this there's greatness in all races, not just in the white race. And I grew up in that environment, in a school that taught us that George Washington Carver gave more to the world than George Washington. Frederick Douglass gave more to the world than Abraham Lincoln. I was taught in that environment, whereas it's the reverse in the public school. So I didn't go to a public school. I went to a private school that taught us, instead of learning about, French and Spanish and these European language, we learned Swahili. And instead of learning about
mm.
Beethoven and Mozart, we learned about Coltrane and Louis Armstrong and these people, great musicians
Whoa.
of African descent. And instead of
Mm,
learning about Picasso, we learned about Black artists. You know what I'm saying?
mm,
We're learning both, which is something that's missing in the public schools. They weren't getting proper Black history
mm.
except maybe in February for a week. Back then, it was
Yeah.
only 1 week Black History Month. It was a Black History Week. It became a month in the 70s. But yeah, so that was the only time you learned about Black history. Otherwise, you're only learning about you were being Europeanized, and this school Africanized me. That's how I got my name Baye. Baye is a Senegalese name, and this is all
Oh,
my mother's doing. This is all my mother's idea. She said, she took all of our kids. Well, actually, my first school was this school, but I have older brothers and sisters. I come from a big family. I have two older brothers, older sister, and they were in public school. She took them out of public school, put them into this private school, changed all of our names from the European names to African names. Yeah.
oh.
And that's how I got my name Baye. It's a Senegalese name. It means straightforward. And
How
yeah,
appropriate.
yeah. So yeah, she was hardcore. And plus she was an artist. She was a
Yeah.
creative person. She was a designer. She was um well, muralist.
Yeah.
She made murals and collages. She was a collagist. Is that a word? Collagist. She made
Sounds like
she made collages. So she was an artist. You walk into my house like you walk into a museum, and this is in the middle of the hood. And
Mhm.
we grew up poor. But if you walk into my
Yeah.
house, you taking off your shoes like it was like Japan. I was ready for Japan because we had to take off my shoes when I was growing up. You come in the house, you take off your shoes. My mother had these we had these parquet floors,
Yeah.
parquet floors
Oh,
that were waxed and buffed and glowing. We had a beautiful home. My mother raised us in a beautiful home, and she had exotic colors and plants and books, and she did a lot with a little. She was a miracle
Yeah.
worker. She
Well,
was a real
I
miracle
remember
worker,
that phrase from
and
your book. Mm.
and
Okay, well, great.
yeah,
I had a feeling she had a real strong influence on you, and
she did.
definitely.
She did.
Okay.
And my father too. I mean, he wasn't in the pitching most of the time, but he was also a musician.
Ah, right.
So when I went over to his house, he made sure I learned the piano. He was a guitarist. He
Oh,
played the blues. He played mostly the blues and some jazz. But yeah, he was also a creative person.
well, that's great. That explains a lot. And so, okay, let's go back to Japan. You're blogging at this point. It's getting some traction, especially after the very first one that went viral, and starting a real conversation with your name straight. That means straightforward. I didn't know that, but that makes a lot of sense now. You decided to take the jump and publish a book with a very provocative title. What led you to make that decision?
It was the blog.
Oh,
The blog was what really jump started my career. I think one of my main motivations for writing the blog was, in addition to being cathartic, and maintaining my mental stability here, which is
ah,
definitely necessary. If you plan to come to Japan, please figure out a way to, you know,
that's a good point.
figure out a way
Therapeutic.
to you gotta build a valve. You need a valve to release the pressure sometime, because if you don't, you might pop on a train or something. So
That's
that was my
right.
valve. The blog was my valve. And but when you're unleashing steam, sometimes it comes out very vitriolic, and mine did sometimes. And I started getting comments in oh, there's the word I've been looking for, comment section. So in the comment section, people would say things like, maybe the problem is you're a racist.
Ah,
You're racist against Japanese people. I'm listening to how you talk about, you're doing the same thing to them that you're complaining about them doing to you. Because you had a problem with this person not sitting next to you. You're expanding that to color all Japanese people. I'm like,
hmm,
that made me sit back and think. I'm like, are they making a point? Is that a good point? So I had to sit back and think about it. What am I doing here? You
hmm,
know, what kind of baggage did I bring here that,
hmm.
you know, I examined everything, and I started blogging about it. I started a blog series called Hi, My Name is Loco and I'm a Racist. So the
Oh,
name of
I
the
see.
blog was Loco in Yokohama. Loco was
Yeah.
my pseudonym. So I wrote this series called Hi, My Name is Loco and I'm a Racist. I based that on when you go to Alcoholics Anonymous, this is how people introduce themselves, right? So I just
Yes.
replaced, alcoholic with racist, right? Because I imagine that if people once people realize that they are racist, what are they going to do about it? They should have an organization where people can go and talk about these things, talk it out, and refrain from, you know, the 12 step, get the 12 steps to get away from that shit, right? So I started thinking like that, and that's how I came up with that title, and I imagine
So,
myself going to such a place going, hi, my name is Baye and I'm a racist, and hi Baye. I didn't call anybody any bad words today. I didn't, kick that Japanese person in his throat who needed it, the one who stood up and walked to the other side of the station when I sat next to him, that kind of thing, and
uh,
that was what gave me the idea for the title of the blog series.
so were
And
you
but what I did,
rehabilitated then?
say it again.
Were you rehabilitated then?
What I
Okay.
was doing this on air, on live, on the blog, and I was really going in. I went to where what has been my experience with racism even before coming to Japan. So I went back to
Mm,
Brooklyn, and how I was raised, and the organization I told you about a little earlier. Part of their method for building Black self-esteem was making sure that we were aware that we had an enemy, that there was a threat out there, and that threat was white. You know, these are the people who have been oppressing us. These are the people who have been, you know, it wasn't like, oh, no, it was, we have an enemy, and the enemy is white. So I grew up trained to be a racist, against white
Oh,
people.
okay, now I get it.
Yeah, yeah. It wasn't like, we're all in this together. That's not where I grew up. I didn't grow up in the Rodney King school of why can't we all just get along. I didn't grow
Uh,
up in that school. I grew up in the other school. So, and in this school, we were trained to be pro-black meant know who your enemy is, know who the threat to your existence is, and it ain't another black person.
okay.
Right. You're trained to love black people and be careful around those white people. So that was already in me, and it took a long time to
Okay.
get that out of me. I mean, I wrote
Mm,
about in the first book certain incidents in my life that enabled me to not go totally, kill the white man, because I grew up in a neighborhood. It was a real genuine melting pot, the
ah,
way you imagine melting pot, but there was no white people. So
ah,
if you can imagine a developing nation melting pot, that's where I grew up in.
ah.
So
I
I
got
grew
it.
up, there was Black Americans, you had Jamaicans and the Trinidadians, Panamanians, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans. So I grew up in a cultural melting pot,
All right.
and but just at the tail end of the white flight from Brooklyn. So there in the mid 70s, before in the 60s and 50s, it was a mixed in or
Mm,
white neighborhood that I grew up in. But
mm,
as more black people moved into the neighborhood, the whites went to the suburbs. So it
mm.
became a black community. But they call that white flight. I want to explain
Yeah.
what white flight meant.
Yeah.
And but some stuck around. Some said, "No, I'm not going anywhere." And these people I grew up with. So in part of that melting pot were some white people, and one of my closest friends was a white guy, and we used to hang out and smoking weed and the whole thing. We were tight. We were bosom buddies. But at that time, I was also part of another pro-black organization, which was a subsect of the Black Muslims, which was called the
Ah,
5% Nation of Islam.
ah, ah,
Oh yeah, you got to read the first book. Whoever's watching this podcast, read my first book. I went fully into this window of knowledge about what's going on in America in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s that most people don't talk about. But I was part of this organization called the 5% Nation of Islam. And if you're not familiar with the 5% Nation of Islam, the Wu-Tang Clan, a lot of them are members.
mm,
Um, Eric B. and Rakim was a member. Queen Latifah was a member.
mm.
This was, it was broad and big. So, um, but in our doctrines, one of the things that we professed was that we are God. The black man is God,
Okay.
and the white man obviously is the devil. So here I am walking down my street with this devil by my side, my best friend, one of my best friends, and yeah. So those are the kind of things you find in the community, and this enabled me to know, because knowing him, I realized he is no devil. He is a good guy. He's a really nice guy. I know his family, everything. He take care of me, feed me sometimes. He's good people. So this enabled me to keep my equilibrium.
Okay.
So
So by
I wasn't able to go over the deep end and go, white people are the devil. I hate white people. I couldn't go there because I had Chris. That was his name, Chris. Also, when I went to university,
mm,
I was a I was a piece of work when I went to university. But there were two teachers who read my work, who read my writing, and said, "Hey, you got something special here. This is
ah,
not the, I just wrote an essay. for one class, for one English teacher. She looked at it and she's like, you got a talent. I was
Mm.
like, really? And she encouraged me and inspired me to take it seriously and take some writing workshops and some writing classes and whatnot. And she was white too. I actually thanked them in my first book, because they were the ones who said, "Listen," they were the first people to tell me, "You're a real writer. You could
Mm.
be one of those people." I was like, "Whoa, okay." So yeah, that was what prevented me from going full white people are evil, full on.
Thank goodness.
And
Okay.
and by the time I came to Japan, I thought I had
Mm.
purged myself of that, you know, the ability to look at an entire people as one thing or another. But then Japan kind
Mm.
of did something, because there's a lot of especially when you're a minority, when you're a visible minority in Japan, it feels like you're surrounded by Japanese ness. And you are, but you kind of turn it into a singularity, which is dangerous
Ah,
because there is there are many personalities and many characters and many people here, individuals here. Even though you see a lot of similarities in behavior, they are still individuals,
yeah.
and they each have their own experiences, their own mindset, and their own view of the world. And you can't judge each one as a singularity, because that's when it got dangerous. And I realized I might have been doing that on my blog, which is why
I
the name of
see.
the book. Hi, my name is, instead of saying this person, I was saying Japanese people this and Japanese
Yeah.
people that. And when you catch yourself doing that, you should step back and say,
Mm.
hmm. And
Take a
that's
look in
what
the
that
mirror.
whole
Yeah.
book was. That whole blog series and that book was me stepping back saying, checking myself. So this book was a very retrospective, very not retrospective, circumspective. How you say checking yourself?
Well, probably
Anyway,
introspective.
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 There
So,
you go. It was a very
yeah.
introspective look at
Mm.
racism. From what am I putting out into the world, and where did
Yes.
that come from, and how can I do better? How can I? And a lot of people who read the book said, "Wow,
Yeah.
I never." Because people are very defensive about racism. As soon as you start talking about racism, oh, I'm not a racist, they don't really take the time to really examine and really be honest about what's going on inside of them, because they're so scared to to face the truth and face the facts. But I did publicly, and I think it inspired other people to do it from reading me do it. This black
I
man, because
agree.
most black people are not
Yeah.
perceived as being capable of being racist because we don't have any power. But
Mm.
and in general sense, you need power to be racist. You have to be able to deny, people certain things, healthcare and jobs and shit like that. And most black people are not in a position to discriminate based on race in that way. So how can you be a racist without any power? But in the sense of how racism is defined nowadays, I realize I fit that description as opposed to the real definition of it. But words meanings evolve over the years, and the way racism has evolved now, it's become this: if you don't like black people, you're a racist. That's not real racism. If you don't hire this person based on their race, this is real racism.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know so anyway,
So that is terrific. That I didn't realize that was the real purpose of the book, the introspective look. That makes a lot more sense now. I'm curious your interaction with Japanese people as it relates to this topic. I know we don't need to focus exclusively on it, but uh, my experience is certainly very different from yours. But there is kind of a tendency, it seems, particularly among Japanese, who just don't have a lot of opportunities to interact with non-Japanese people here in Japan.
right.
Certainly outside of Tokyo, in particular. I mean, they kind of do group us. Sometimes Americans are grouped together, and my goodness, there's so many different varieties. What's your experience with how Japanese people treat this subject and also reacted to your book?
Um, unfortunately, I haven't had many responses from Japanese people to the book because the language issue.
Mm.
So the response from you know English speakers has been tremendous. Was tremendous,
Yeah.
obviously.
Mm.
But yeah, it was. Yeah, I haven't gotten much of the Japanese perspective. I've been trying to get it translated. Haven't gotten it translated yet. But
Mm.
yeah, I haven't gotten much response from Japanese readers. However, I've I've shared some of the ideas introduced initially in that book in Japanese. You know, because I currently have two columns. I have one in English and one in Japanese. So I have one for
Mm.
Japan Times and one for Toyo Keizai, which
Oh
is
yeah.
in Japanese. So in my Toyo Keizai column, I do tackle some of these issues.
Ah,
But and I have seen some responses, but they haven't been. Well, you can't really judge from the
mm.
internet because if you look
Yeah.
at Yahoo Japan, the people who are attracted there are the Twitter people. It's just kind of
Yeah. Subset.
yeah.
Mm.
And if you judge Japan by those people, you will leave
Mm.
this country running like your hair's on fire.
Okay.
So you can't, like I learned from my experiences blogging, you can't judge Japan by one subset because
That's true.
you yeah.
That's true. So, all right, getting into writing, particularly the Black Eye column in English on Japan Times, you've covered some pretty sensitive subjects here. Can you review some of them and tell us a little bit what you found?
Well, a little background. When after I published the books, there was they did very well, like as you mentioned, and I was approached by Japan Times about doing a column. And initially, I didn't want to do a column. I was like, I like you said, I wanted to reach Japanese people, and writing a column in English for an English language newspaper, I didn't think was the way to do that because I felt like what I had to say, I've said what I had to say. I'm preaching to the choir with foreigners. I need to, I need to reach Japanese people. But then when I met with the editor, they told me that 25% of the readership of the
Hmm,
Japan Times are Japanese readers. I'm like, oh,
hmm,
okay. So I said yes, but my goal, my intention for that column was not to do what I think you're saying, which is kind of address these race issues in Japan. It wasn't about that. I felt like the the most I felt like the reason for a lot of the problems, the racialized issues here in Japan is not hate or it's not hate. It's mostly ignorance and fear.
ah,
So
mm,
I felt like if I could address that in my column, that would do wonders.
mm,
So my main goal with Black Eye was to introduce to Japanese readers. I think what they were most concerned about, or what generates this fear, is they're not sure what we're doing here. You
mm,
know, if they're like, what? Why are black people in jail? Why don't you? Why didn't you stay in your own? What are you doing here? Why are you in Japan? So, and they're getting their answers from Japanese media, and these answers are
yeah,
not to our, are not conducive to a good and positive environment in Japan most of the time. They're
mm,
not getting good information.
eh,
So I thought if they heard some happy stories, if they heard some good stories about what foreigners are doing here, and black people in particular are doing here, this would balance out a lot of the negative stories that they've been getting in the media about, rapists in Okinawa and,
yeah,
this kind of shit that they've been, sorry, this kind of stuff that they've been getting in the Japanese media about black people, haranguing people and Rapungi, dragging them into nightclubs.
yeah,
This is the kind of
right,
news that was out
mm,
there about black people. So, of course, and they trust their media, as you know.
Yeah.
So, it, if they see that on the news and then they see a black person in the street, they're gonna make that connection. Oh, this must be one of those rapists from Okinawa or something like that. Or they got this, or they got this idea of all the black people are military. The black Americans are military, and the other ones are the Africans coming from these poor countries coming here to, you know,
Mhm.
do damage in our country. So I said, there's more to it. They need to know that the things we're doing. So that was an initial thing, just to introduce black professors, black,
Mm.
lawyers, black musicians. This is the thing. These are the other things that we're doing here. These are the things that you don't read about in the Japanese media, or you don't see on Japanese TV often enough. And that was the main thing I was doing initially. And I introduced. I think the stories I'm most proud of. I did a series on black women married to Japanese men, and
All right.
the trials and tribulations and joys and pains of building a family and a home here in Japan. And I think one of my most popular stories was when I told about a sister a black woman who met a Japanese man in New York at a club and at a party, and they fell in love in New York, and then they came back to Japan with him, and they have a family. Not only back in the States now, but that's one of my most popular stories because she was a character. She was a real New Yorker, so I was able to capture her voice in the story, and it worked out really well. So yeah, those are the type of things. And I wrote a story about a professor from Mali who came here and rose up in the ranks. He was an architectural student in China, and well, he went from Mali to China because China had a arrangement with Mali to educate people, in exchange for coming there and exploiting their resources. But anyway, so he went to Mali, learn Chinese because the teachers there can't speak any other language. So you had to learn Chinese first before you can study architecture in Chinese. So he had to learn Chinese first, then learned architecture in China at one of their top universities, and then he took his knowledge and came to Japan and started teaching architecture in Japan. He became the head of the university, president of the university in Kyoto. So yeah,
Wow.
like that. So these type of stories I want to tell. Japanese don't know
Uh,
about these type of stories when they're focusing on
yeah.
the
No.
nonsense. So that was the goal of Black Eye.
That
Now
is the deal.
occasionally issues arise while I'm
Yeah.
writing. Like
Right.
blackface and these kind of
Yeah.
things pop up, and I can't ignore them.
Yeah.
So then I write about blackface, and that's what brought me into activism. It wasn't came here with the intention of being this activist from America. It was like I have a platform, I have a voice. I'm seeing things that need to be addressed, and I address them.
So, okay, that is great to know that background. Let's talk for a second about racial profiling because it seems to be back in the news again. And what's your take on this? I mean, frankly, I don't have any experience with it, but I imagine you have a different notion.
Well, in 20 years, I've been stopped by the police maybe 3 times, and each time it was legit. No, 4 times. Sorry, 4 times. 3 times it was legit. The last time it wasn't. They
Ah,
just stopped me on my bike, and they were like, "This is in front of Hachioji Station." They started giving me the business for no reason. Like, I'm like, "Did you steal this bike? We had the incident with people." I'm like, it was clearly racial profiling. I made them aware that I was a reporter. That was a writer for a newspaper. You don't really want to be messing with a guy with, I'm the wrong guy to be messing with. I'm telling you right now. And they continue like, we don't care. You're a Gaijin. This is our country, which is true. So I'm like, okay, do your thing. And I did, but they didn't realize I write for a Japanese publication. So I did. I wrote about this incident in Toyo Keizai, and yeah, so it got ugly, but um, yeah, I've spoken with people. I've interviewed like people who've had very horrible experiences with racial profiling here in Japan over the years, and not just black people either. White people,
mm,
Middle Eastern people, Asian people. It's an issue.
Yeah.
And it's an issue to the point where I don't know if you remember a couple of years back, the U.S. Embassy issued a warning.
Yeah.
So it's real. It's not like, oh, you guys are overreacting. No, the U.S.
Mm.
Embassy issued a warning that foreigners are being targeted by Japanese police. So be on your best behavior and keep certain things on your person, your ID, all your credentials. Make sure that you got your shit together because there's an issue. So
Mm. Mm.
it was real, and they have lawyers, Japanese lawyers, who are looking into this,
Mm.
and it's actually a couple of cases right now underway, against the police for profiling that are underway
Yeah.
right now. So I've
Yeah.
written about those as well. So yeah, it's a thing, and I've been kept abreast of it. I have friends who are involved in the case actually.
Okay. Okay. Good. Yeah, I think I covered that too for a little bit. Not like you, but very good. One more thing about another topic that got a lot of media attention in your Black Eye column: the whole issue with Naomi Osaka. Can you
Yeah.
tell us about that?
Um. Well, I think the first time was when I think it was the Australian Open. Maybe at that time, one of the Japanese companies here, Nishin, had put together a commercial featuring her and what's his name, the Japanese tennis player.
Oh, Nishikori. Uh, yeah, from Shimane.
I forgot his name, but anyway, they
Yeah.
put together a animated commercial campaign featuring Osaka Naomi and him. But when their depiction of her skin was practically white,
Yeah.
right?
I
So
remember.
they definitely Europeanized her for some reason, and I wrote an article about that, and Nishin apologized and said it was they thought the art was approved by her advertising company and blah 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 blah, some excuse, but it wasn't even a real apology. It was kind of a you're sorry not sorry kind of
Yeah.
kind of
Mm.
faux apology, and faux apology, how you say it, and they were like, okay, we're tired of you guys telling us how we should do things over here. But when I wrote about it, I again, even on Yahoo, they were like, oh yeah, why did they do that?
Mm.
This one stumped them because
Mm.
this was like, whoa, this is blatant. Her skin
Yeah.
is clearly not even light brown, So, and I think one of the things that was being said initially is that, oh, Japanese are not familiar with non-Japanese skin tones. So when we do the anime, we don't have those kind of inks, and we're not accustomed to work with those kind of inks. I'm like, well, you know,
Yeah. Mm.
give me a break, right? But there were many examples of animation where they didn't have any problem making this guy tar black, you know. I mean, it's funny the things that go on here sometimes. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's what happened with Naomi initially. And then um when Black Lives Matters was in full bloom, um during the US Open, she took to wearing the caps with the names of the children of the people who had been
Yeah.
murdered
Yeah.
by police officers in the US. And I was so proud of her. I was, but it caused quite a controversy over here
Mm.
because her representing Japan meant that Japan
Uh,
was on board with Black Lives Matter, and as we
uh,
know, Japan was not on board with Black Lives Matter, nor were their advertisers, the Japanese
uh,
advertisers. Nissan and these guys are like, no, we don't care about Black Lives Matter. We giving you the money because you so that caused
mm.
some issues here that she was, you know, Americanizing Japan, basically.
Yeah.
Japan didn't care. Japan didn't give a hoot about Black Lives Matter, but because of Naomi Osaka, they had to. She kind of
Uh,
forced their hand. So
uh,
after she won the U.S. Open, now you look at the Sunday morning shows on Japanese television, they're trying to pronounce Tamir Rice, and they're trying to pronounce these
what is
names
it?
of these people who were murdered because the hats she was wearing. They had
Um,
to take a stand. And so I'm very proud of what she did. She forced Japan's hand. She forced Japan to pay lip pay lip service to Black Lives Matter, at
okay.
least. And even by doing that raised awareness of it over here in
Mm.
Japan. And as a result, there was a protest, a march here in Japan for Black Lives Matter. Over 5,000 people attended, and when I attended that march as well, the vast majority were Japanese. I'm talking
Yeah.
4,000 of the 5,000 were Japanese. So
Okay.
it was real. It wasn't just like a bunch of foreigners marching around, Shibuya.
Yeah.
It was, Japanese are out there in force. So yeah, I was very
Okay.
proud of that.
Okay, great. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. Your latest book, tell us what it is. And first of all, you need to introduce your partner.
Who? Oh, Miki?
Yeah.
I don't know. Miki, she's the realest person I know, man. She's a designer and a mason, a landscaper, low key philosopher. With no interest in being called any of these things. She builds things with her hands, furniture, gardens, staircases, freaking walls. But also she builds the stability and love and the occasional emotional minefield. She doesn't
Yeah,
talk a
you
lot,
got it.
but
Well,
when she
tell us
does,
what.
it's usually
Okay.
straight to the gut.
So, what's the name of the book?
The name of the book is Words by Baye, Art by Miki.
And why did you choose that?
Um, well, why did I choose that? I want to showcase both of us. It's not. I think that
Hmm.
what everything I've accomplished here in Japan, most of it has been with Miki by my side. I met
Mm.
Miki right after I published my first book.
Hmm.
That's around the time I met. So this is before any of my, success or stardom or
Yeah.
whatever here in Japan. She was she was there by my side from jump. So and encouraging me and also, keeping me in check, making sure I don't go overboard. She was there. And so I think this book is about it's about not only just that collision of culture, but the connection that results.
Hmm.
And it's about love and partnership. It's about identity and belonging.
Hmm.
It's about art and creation, self discovery through struggle. And that's the main themes of the book. Humor, in particular, humor, and not just humor for the sake of it, but humor as a survival mechanism. You know, and yeah, humor is a essential thread of the book, as you could probably tell from how I talk. I infuse humor in everything I'm writing and thinking and doing because it's a salve. Humor is a salve. Humor is a salve for the soul, and it keeps me balanced. It keeps me able to laugh at some of the nonsense that really shouldn't be laughed at. But I think that laughing at misunderstandings, at cultural missteps, at the absurdity of life in Japan.
Hmm.
Um, humor is a tool for navigating these highs and these lows, of living abroad. And yeah, it's the best coping mechanism I've come up with for for supporting me as I've built this bridge
Hmm.
between our cultures, Black American culture and Japanese cultures.
Okay, great. Well, by the way, I just did a quick time check. We're having such a good conversation here. This time is flying by. I do want to ask for any questions. So if you got anything, we've got several people tuning in. Please just put that in the chat and we'll get to that. But while we're waiting, I want some advice. I get a lot of comments and questions from people that are interested in moving to Japan, not just visiting for a temporary time, but like the two of us have done, making a life here. Can you give them any advice about what it's like to do that?
Um, well, what is it like to move to Japan?
Yeah, I mean, for example, I know it's probably very specific on each individual situation. I remember you recently wrote about how you gave some advice to, I think it was another African American family from New York, and that you got some questions about what's life really like here.
Yeah. I get those kind of questions all the time. So, um, I don't know. I would just say if you're considering moving to Japan, just realize that Japan isn't an escape. You know,
Mm.
it's an encounter. You'll be pushed. You'll be pushed outside your comfort zone. Definitely, this is one thing I would warn people about. You pushed out just outside your comfort zone, outside your sphere of comfort, culturally, emotionally, and sometimes even physically. But in that space, you'll find versions of
Mm.
yourself you didn't know existed. And if you're open to being reshaped by the experience, not just entertained by the novelty, but if you're open to being reshaped by this experience, and Japan's a classroom that you'll never graduate from.
That's quite a
you know,
soundbite. That's great. Okay.
and living here has it's taught me how much of what I thought was universal was actually just American. You know,
Mm.
it's forced me to slow down, observe, and listen more carefully to what's said, and especially to what's not being said. And that happens as a result of not knowing the language.
Mm.
So as I was learning the language, before you learn the language, you you're essentially blind, deaf, and dumb here in
Yeah.
Japan. you know, and and most of us can't remember being blind, deaf, and dumb when we were babies. So you'll have that experience as an adult if you come here, and
That's a great way
and
to put it. Yeah.
it's a freeing experience in a way. And one way is it in cutting off those senses, it allows you to really see what's happening in here.
Mm.
When those senses are cut off, when you're unable to understand a single word of what's happening around you, when you can't read the advertisements on the trains, when you have those kind
Yeah.
of experiences, it's like there's sensory loss.
Yeah.
It's like when how Daredevil, when he lost his sight but his hearing was enhanced. Well, when you lose your sight, your hearing, and your and
You're
your
really true.
speaking ability, it's going to enhance what's going on in your heart. What's going on in your mind, and that's a good thing sometimes. Well, it can be torturous at the same time, but there's ways to make the best of it, and I think that how you navigate that is going to define your experience here in Japan.
That's great advice. That's terrific. By the way, we have a question
Yes.
from somebody I know, a Canadian. Quick comment on Trump's USA Today. First thoughts. Oh, there's a loaded question.
Um, I try not to think about Trump as a rule. I mean, I remember when the first time he was elected, there was a skit on Saturday Night Live. It's a popular American show. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but there was a skit where two black guys were at a party and they were celebrating Hillary's victory, beforehand, right? And the two black guys were like, uh huh. Oh, you think she's gonna win? Uh huh. I was one of those guys. I was
Uh,
like, nah. I know America. I knew Trump had a good damn chance. I was not caught off guard. I think most people of African descent, Black Americans, were not caught off guard by that because we know the real America. Whereas I think a lot of white people in America were living in Disneyland, but we were living in America. In America, the America we knew, the one that treated Obama like a piece of shit. We knew that America was open to the idea of a Trump, and more so than a Hillary. So yeah, I that's all I'm going to say about Trump is that he's not a surprise. His reelection is no surprise. What's happening to America is no surprise. It's a comeuppance that was a long time in the coming. You know, it's Trump was inevitable. Leave it at that. He was
And you
inevitable.
probably,
America was going that direction since George Washington.
I suppose growing up, you probably were around for the Central Park Five whole
I was,
issue.
I was,
Mm,
you know, I was, and Trump was. I, but I don't want to point to Trump. Trump is just a symptom of the American cancer. He is not the bad guy. He is not Hitler. He's he's a
okay.
clown. Like Bush was a clown. Like Clinton was a clown. These are not. He is not the orchestrator. He's a bow on the friggin' violin.
Okay. All right.
you
Well,
know.
we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for that honest answer. Terrific. And it looks like our questioner also agrees. Wonderful. Whoops. All right. So, we are actually a little bit over our time, and in the interest
Oh,
of
no problem.
keeping this to an hour, I want to finish up here. But first of all, we need to know, okay, where do we go in order to get copies of your newest book? And I assume the website, but also Amazon.com. But let us know. And also, what else are you going to do from here on out? Are you staying in Japan? You're going back to America? What's the plan?
Yes, you can go to my website, BayeMcNeil.com. And if you're in Japan, I can send you the book signed. I get Miki to sign it as well. So
Oh,
let me know. I got plenty of, as you can see, I got some books here available.
okay.
I got a few in stock. So if people want to get them signed, autographed, let me know. I
Oh,
got them for you. Otherwise, you can go to Amazon. They're available on, Amazon JP, Amazon.com, and, you know, internationally. And other websites too, Barnes and Nobles, if you're anti Amazon. A lot of people are anti Amazon these days.
oh,
So, yeah, they're available on other book websites as well. It might even be on Rakuten. So, yeah, you can get it there as well. As far as what's coming up next, um, well, let's see. I'm working on a couple of projects. I'm working on something that brings the stories from words by art by Miki off the page and into the room. A bilingual stage show
oh,
based on words by art by Miki. Think
wow.
storytelling meets theater meets real talk, all in
Wow.
two languages. It's
Oh,
part memoir, part cultural mirror, part life.
great.
Yeah, and so also working on a project to translate the new book into Japanese as well. So
Fantastic.
I started a new Japanese blog all in Nihongo, and I've been tweaking Japanese versions of these stories. So if you read Japanese, I'll put in the notes the address for my new Japanese web blog, where you can see
Great.
some of the translations I've been doing of the new book and some of the essays I've written.
Oh, that's great. Wow, these are terrific projects. Please keep us informed. I'll put those in the notes for the recording of this
I,
too. That is great. I hope that you make a trip down to Kyushu to do this.
I shall.
Oh, all right. All right. Well, I'll be in the audience there. Wonderful. Baya, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for our audience, many of whom have been on the whole time. And I know we've gone a little bit over, but we really appreciate your listening in and comments and engagement. I am looking forward to continuing to read your work, and it's also stay in touch as a fellow writer here in Japan. So thank you again.
My pleasure, and thank you everyone for listening. It's been I haven't done this in a minute, so thank you. It's been great.
Good. All right. Well, have a good rest of your day, evening, wherever you are, and we'll follow up with the recording in a couple of days. All right. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching and or listening to another story from the Read My Lips series of podcasts on Real Gaijin. Tell us what you think and be sure to tune in again next time.